Hey, good morning. Welcome to today's meeting of the Scrutiny Committee. This is the last Scrutiny Committee of the year. Now, before we start, I have to inform the committee that the convener, Councillor McCabe, has stood down from the post, which means I'll be looking for a member of the committee to chair today's meeting until Council can come round to appointing a convener, which will be next year. So for just today's meeting, can I ask if any member wishes to nominate somebody to chair the meeting? And I should just say that in terms of standing orders, ideally it should be a member from the opposition group. It should be Margaret or Robert.
I would like to nominate Provost Bissett.
I'd like to second that.
Thank you. In that case, Provost Bissett, do you want to take the chair?
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, well, welcome everyone to today's meeting of Scrutiny, 15th of December 2022. It's the final Scrutiny meeting of the year. The first item on the agenda is apologies. Do we have any apologies?
We have apologies from Councillor Aitchison and Councillor Robertson, and should maybe just add as well that the education portfolio holder is invited or was invited to attend today's meeting. But unfortunately she had a prior engagement, so Councillor Murtagh is unable to join us today.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting and identify the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. So do we have any declarations of interest? No. Thank you. Agenda item 3 is a minute of the Scrutiny Committee held on the 10th of November 2022. Can we agree that is a true record? Agreed.
Agreed.
Any matters? Thank you. Any matters arising from that minute? I would just like to ask the question around whether we had a robust discussion the last time on EPIAs, and very important they are as well. So I wonder if is there any update on the EPIAs?
Yes, thanks, Convener. Yeah, in regard to the training, there was training planned for this week, in fact, for all members and chief officers, which is going to be a summary of the equalities duties that are upon the council, plus how the EPIA process works. That's going to take place in the new year. We think before we do that, we're going to give a training session to members on the budget process, which will also touch on EPIAs. We'll do that first, then we'll do the second EPIA, more specific EPIA training shortly afterwards. So I would anticipate that being going into January, early February at the very latest for that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Perry. Any other questions on the minute? No, thank you. Agenda item 4 is the rolling action log. Is there any questions? That's pages 9 to 12. Is there any questions on the rolling action log? Mr. Miller?
Just to say that the rolling action log is up to date, and in the far right hand column you can see progress listed in terms of the various previous items identified, and the one at the very top is around the Pupil Equity Fund, and there's a report on the agenda today.
Okay, thank you. Just a question I'd like to ask on the agenda, rolling action log 596, Care Inspector Inspection Report and Action Plan, Rannoch Early Learning and Childcare Centre. Is there a timescale for that report?
Well, what happens is that we bring a report to Scrutiny on any inspection report where across the categories of inspection there's an evaluation of anything less than good, even if it's just for one of the indicators. So that's why it came here, and what's noted in the right hand column is the work that's been done to address that. It will not be until the Care Inspectorate revisits that we would come back to the committee to say that the evaluations have now changed. I don't know if Rhoda's got anything further to add to that.
Thank you, Mr. Naylor.
No, that's correct, Robert.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right, update.
Agenda item 5 is the pupil equity funding outcomes update, pages 13 to 24. Certainly, the report is pretty comprehensive, and the case studies are good examples of how the money is actually used. So I think we'll just hand it over to Rona J that's going to be delivering the report.
Yes, thanks, convener.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm hoping you've had time to read the report, as the convener has said, and the case studies. The purpose is to update you from our previous report, which was brought to this committee in 2021, papers in January and April of that year. And we're recommending that you agree that the arrangements we have in place for pupil equity funding are appropriate, that you note the impact made to closing the attainment gap across Falkirk, and to note the plans in place to continue to close the attainment gap as we move forward. So we don't intend to read the report to you, we'll just take you through the main sections of it. So you'll know that section 3 talks about climate change implications, and section 4 gives you some background, talking about the review that was taking place in 2021 and Scrutiny plan, and you know about the refreshed Scottish Attainment Challenge, which has expanded its mission now, and a very important part of that new refreshed Scottish Attainment Challenge is the Strategic Equity Fund, which has come to local authorities, and the Framework for Accelerating Progress. So its full title is Framework for Recovery and Accelerating Progress, but that was launched in March of 2022 and sets out some really fundamental changes and expectations for local authorities. And you also know that there has been a change to the free meals. This is now universal for primary 1 up to primary 3, but also was introduced in primary 4 and primary 5. The free school meals are slightly different. You'll note in section 4.2 that to date, Falkirk's received £749,903 in pupil equity funding across primary and secondary schools since its inception in 2017. Just on the note of school meals, we've brought to attention just in the latter half of section 4.3 that the free school meal entitlement for the Scottish Government has changed families applying for free school meals, and that has made a bit of a difference to the numbers of registered people who've applied for free school meal entitlement. Now, whilst the pupil equity funding allocations are still based on the number of pupils applying for free school meals or entitled to them, the universal provision of free school meals does of course affect some families not making that application because they know they're going to get them. So that's something that we're very aware of. And that's one of the biggest jobs of our central team, which is noticed there. We have a small team of people at the centre who keep on top of the money. So Gail Martin, colleague to my left, probably your right, is our SAC lead officer. We have a resource officer who keeps working with schools, and our other two resource officers particularly to look at the PEF spend, and we have a bit of support within our HR department. We also have a lot of support from our Scottish Attainment Challenge Attainment Advisor, who is working with us through Education Scotland. So in section 5, we're asking to make some considerations of our work. I think from 2017, we started to look at universal provision. Education Scotland produced a diagram called the Interventions for Equity. If you're not familiar with that, I can ask Brian to share it with you. We still look closely at the things contained in there. But as we've moved through since 2017, we've worked very hard with our schools to make sure that they also have universal provision, but they have some very targeted provision too. So we're asking them to always be looking that those children who are entitled to the funding are very carefully monitored, and that as well as universal provisions which benefit all young people, children, young people, there are very specific pieces of evidence to show what has been done to target those children who are specifically entitled to funding. And then we had the pandemic. So we still have the pandemic, we're not out of that yet, as you know, but prior to 2019, we were on track to really keep reducing our gap between quintile 1 and quintile 5. But that's been interrupted somewhat. So we're still on track to make progress, but not to the levels that we had been prior to the pandemic. But we do think that that's mainly because the pandemic really disrupted face-to-face learning. And for those children who are most vulnerable and in most need, that was a significant difference in change for them, and will take a little while to recover. And it also says there in section 5.1 that there are physical and mental health issues that we're still uncovering and the impact we are still assessing, and that has reduced improvement but not stopped it. But that's not a Falkirk problem, that's a trend across the whole of Scotland, understandably, because it affected every single person. But I think, in fairness to Falkirk, we identified a need to work together with our schools in primary and secondary really intensively. In November last year, we raised our concerns with schools about the impact on attendance and exclusions, which we'll tackle later. And we worked together with our heads of establishment, their teams, to self-evaluate together as a service where their children were, so that we were ready to reset the button, if you like, in August 2022, when we were able to come back for the first term normally and see how we were going with that. The next section under there gives you some figures about literacy and numeracy, and it shows you broken down by primary and secondary and gives you a bit of an indication of where the improvement has been made across 2017, 2019 and where we are now in 2022. So it's quite good to see that even with the disruption, we do have an overall improvement in reducing the gap. But within that, as you always look behind aggregated data, there are little bits that we need to work on. So for our broad general education, it's been a 2%. And for our secondaries from S1 to S3, it's been a 1.8%. So we know we have still got work to do, but we're not disheartened by the fact that overall we have made progress. And the same for numeracy. Not such a positive story for our primaries. There's been a bit of a drop there by 2.5%, but we're on track. We have targeted work going on there, and we're looking very carefully with our schools where that needs to be looked at the most. So we have a very proportionate and focused way of looking at our numeracy attainment across all of our primary schools, and where there are particular areas where numeracy in a particular school is an issue, we have work going on there bespokely with each team as we need to. In secondary, we're really pleased to see that had actually, the gap had reduced a little bit there, so we're making sure that we share the good stories of how that has happened across all of our schools. Take you on to the attendance. In recognising that attendance was severely affected across Scotland, and Falkirk was no different, we agreed with our Forth Valley and West Lothian colleagues that we would make attendance a regional collaborative stretch aim. So we have it as a stretch aim for Falkirk, but all 4 authorities, which is Stirling, Clacks, West Lothian and ourselves, had all identified attendance as something they wanted to improve. So we are now working that as a group of authorities. We now have a dashboard set up that all practitioners can access. It is populated with research about the impacts of attendance and absence on pupils' learning and some of the reasons and research behind why absence is an issue out with the pandemic. So that's going to be very helpful. It means we have officers from the RIC and from the centre working with clusters and schools to make sure that we're looking at the culture of absence and the culture of attendance, and how schools can really target universally to make sure that school is somewhere children absolutely want to be, and that where there are issues of attendance with families, we're looking at the whole family as well as the child to see what we can do to improve that. In terms of exclusions, we continue to monitor these month by month. We noted in November 2021 there was a real spike in exclusions in Falkirk, and we know why. So in November 2021, that was when the Omicron virus hit our schools really severely in terms of staff absence. It became critical over November and December, and those young people, young people who'd been managing with key adults, with extra support, with structures in place to help them with transitions between the classes and into school, with family support workers, those staff were really affected by absence. And of course that routine and that security for those children wobbled, as well as in secondary, where they were having a number of different people covering subjects because subject specialists were off. And some young people who had been managing with that support didn't cope so well without it. So we know that was the reason for it, and it is coming down. But we're really pleased to report that since August 2022, we have had no exclusions at all of our care experienced young people, because that's another one of our stretch aims, is to improve the attendance and attainment of our care experienced children and young people. And during the pandemic, there were a number of children who were in that category who suffered from absence issues and exclusion, but we're really delighted with the work that we're doing in that focus. We've had no exclusions at all from any care experienced young people. We continue to monitor exclusions and attendance on a monthly basis, And we know that by sector, by school and by cohort. We know it by groups of interest in terms of care experienced children, in terms of those children in the lowest deciles of poverty affected. We know it by ethnic minority, and we know it by children with additional support needs. So we really are looking very carefully, month by month, on how our attendance and exclusion rates are doing. Section 6 takes you to consultation and tells you a bit more about how we work with our head teachers to identify pupils and families who are impacted the most. You will know from the work that we shared with you through the pandemic just the efforts that were made by all of our school teams and indeed in ELCs to reach out to those families we knew were going to be affected the most. And some of these legacies have been keeping going. We will look very carefully now at the data around about our children to make sure we're targeting in the right way and reaching out to the right supports and the right services to help. We measure our data through the school year. We take 4 attainment lifts. So the curriculum for excellence levels are lifted 4 times a year in October, December, March and May. And in between these times, we have visits into schools to discuss their predictions for children's progress and attainment so that we can pick up any issues or wobbles or concerns that we have in plenty of time. If we identify that there are schools needing more help than others, then we provide that help, support and challenging. And we're undertaking another thematic review of 25 of our schools between January and March to look at the quality of learning, teaching and assessment. And that assessment includes how people are tracking and monitoring the attainment of our children most affected by poverty. So our quality improvement team have a busy schedule ahead. It's a proportionate look where schools are on track, where attendance, exclusion and attainment are good. They have a lighter touch, and that allows us to work very closely with schools who need that extra support. I'm going to hand over now to Gail just a little bit. She's going to talk you through some of the financial information. Section 7.
Good morning, everyone. So we're looking at Section 7 implications. So as you'll be aware, funding from the very start has been applied for the pupils that have applied, not those that are entitled to free school meals from P1 to S2. This year, the government changed the funding approach. So instead of year-on-year funding, it is now approved until 2026, which makes it a bit easier for schools in terms of that planning and progress over a longer term. What I will say is, whilst the government increased the amount from £1,200 to £1,250 per child, the amount this year has not been allocated to all children that have applied for and have been approved for free school meals, simply because the level of applications from all authorities over the past year has increased and exceeded the budget that was available by the Scottish Government. So whilst the funding is very welcomed and Falkirk schools will receive £4,962,315 each year from 2022 to 2026, that does not cover all children currently in Falkirk that are receiving free school meals. And given where we're going to be with poverty increase over the next few years, we envisage that number to increase further in terms of those that would be requiring it. However, the emphasis is still there for head teachers to ensure that this is a targeted spend and it's there to support children who require it that are not on track for their learning and would require further support and financial assistance for that. So you will see in the table that we have given our PEP allocations, and these are the ones that are set from our lowest that we can disclose for primary of 7,350 to the highest within primary of 137,200. We are also have just carried out a financial statement that we would carry out every 2 months for our schools, and we're on track for spend as well. So we should be around about 30 to 40% of spend at our schools, and from the 8th of December our schools are at 33% spend, which they've done quite well to catch up given where we were during COVID because of limitations with bringing in additional staffing and resources, etc. On resources, approximately 50% of the spend which would be in the schools will be on staff, the other 50% will be in resources. That's not a clear figure across all schools, but again we would look at schools knowing their communities and understanding the needs of their children to determine what's the best approach and how they would spend. But we do have a resource officer who's there to support our schools specifically for PEF to ensure that we're on track, and we are also supporting schools with any legal implications of that spend as well. Any additional services in third sector, so we work quite closely with our third sector. Some of the spend that's created, which would not be clear as staffing, but as resources, is where we might work with, for example, Bernardo's, and we've got partnerships with quite a lot of their local and national third sectors, Bernardo's, Aberlour, One Parent Family, etc. A lot of that is family support work that's come in, creating those barriers that could maybe take place between schools and the families in order to make sure that those crises are reduced and the relationships are built up better with schools as well. And I'll hand you over to Rona for legal.
Okay, thank you. In terms of legality, you'll know that we are statutorily obliged to publish our standards and policies report, and that schools have to have school improvement plans and establishment improvement plans on an annual basis. We've made sure in Falkirk right from the inception of pupil equity funding, because the government at the time did say to head teachers, and we heard them saying it, that it would be bureaucracy light. We chose in Falkirk to make sure that we had plans in place from 2017 onwards, and these have been improved and become more detailed year on year to this point. So our schools are asked to complete a demographic contextual analysis each year as part of the school improvement plan, and a very specific long plan for their pupil equity funding to spend and what they're spending it on. And that helps us as a team to make sure that, although that's their statutory duty to report on that legally, but we also have a very good way in Falkirk now of keeping track of how that's being spent and being able to tie that up between the priorities and school improvement plans to make sure that there's a real cohesion between what the money is being planned to spend on and what schools are then planned to do in terms of their learning priorities and improvement priorities. And we're continually working with our schools to see how we can be involving young people and families in that decision making and improving on that every year as well. Section 7.4 to the risk, equalities and sustainability. As Gail has said, funds have to be spent, and we do monitor that very carefully, and we're spending things that are not being spent either in time or timely. We help schools to move that forward. Because we monitor it so closely, if people attempt to spend money we think is not appropriate or not the best use of that funding, then we can also become involved in that. That happens very rarely, because it means that we're looking at it so risks are minimised by the fact that we are monitoring risk continuously. And in terms of equalities, this is for all children and young people, but as Gail has said and I have said, it is targeted specifically to those children who are most in need and affected by poverty and whose attainment is not on track as it should be. Just at the end of section 7, before I get to the stretch aims, information on the stretch aims is contained in our service improvement plan. It went to the Education Executive and is available online as part of committee papers, and it went in November 2022. So if you would like to see the full suite of our stretch aims and the rationale behind how these were set, it is all sitting as an appendix to the service improvement plan. And there's a section of them just below at the end of section 7 there, which gives you an example of them. We would just like to point out, and we are most apologetic for this. I read this numerous times, Gail and I read it together, and we did not notice the error in the very last section of the tables about exclusions, where it should say sector, primary and secondary, and says secondary literacy and numeracy. So you might have been a bit confused by the percentages in there because it's just the headings that are incorrect, so our apologies for that. But in terms of setting our stretch aims, we were really ambitious in Falkirk. We took our draft to Scottish Government and to Education Scotland. We were able to tell them that we set our stretch aims being very ambitious for quintile 1 and giving the most challenge and the most increase to those children in quintile 1. And you can see that overall, for example, in literacy, we're looking for an 8% improvement and increase in literacy and a 4% improvement in numeracy for primary. Now that's based on our last 5 years of attainment. It's based on our current predictions and the incremental progress that we've made over the last 3 years, including during the pandemic. And we believe that we really can achieve these targets and are on track at the moment to do so. You'll see there's a 2% for both literacy and numeracy in secondary. And if we move down to attendance, a 6% increase for primary and a 5% increase for secondary. Now, as we mentioned before, attendance is a real focus for our Regional Improvement Collaborative, and at the moment, Gail is part of the steering group for that work, and at the moment we are on track in Falkirk of the 4 authorities to be making the most progress with improving attendance. So we're really pleased that the work that we're doing is already making a difference this early into the session. And in terms of exclusions, we want per 1,000 pupils to go from 18 to 10, which is a drop of 8 for primary, and we want a significant reduction in secondary of 22 from 42 to 20. And again, we're already seeing progress this early on, and we're fairly confident that we can meet that target by June 2023. So just in conclusion, we would like you to note the improvement there that we've made and our ambitions for our straight James. We think we can do it. We're very proud of what we've achieved so far in Falkirk, and as we've said in many forums, what we managed to sustain and keep improving through the pandemic in terms of attainment and how we supported those families and children and young people living in poverty was nothing sort of miraculous at times. So I hope this report's given you a flavour of this, and Gail's going to talk to you just briefly about the choice of the 2 case studies at the back before we finish.
So I've provided you with 2 case studies, one for Falkirk High, one with Langley's Primary School. I'm sure you've all had a chance to read them. What I will say is that both these schools are, there's a focus on them both locally and nationally. So there's case studies being written as part of the Regional Improvement Collaborative on both these schools and the improvement they've made over the past year in particular. And that's been focused as well within Education Scotland and Scottish Government. So we're very proud of the work our schools are doing. It's not just Langley's and Falkirk, but they'd already provided quite comprehensive information for us that we could share with you. What is very much at the heart of the improvement they've made is their knowledge, understanding for their children and families and that needs. That key element of change has most definitely been relationships. And although relationships doesn't need funding, what we do need is funding in order to make time for staff to build those relationships with families and with the children. And you will see one of the quotes within a section for Falkirk High, watching a young person open his envelope from SQA receiving 5, National 4 at the end of a 4th year was amazing. He was a non-attender, but by giving him a bespoke timetable and supporting him and his dad, he achieved the unachievable. These were a group of young people who were persistent in terms of non-attending. There was very difficult relationships between the school and the families. That changed over a period of just 3 months of really consistent contacting of the parents and the families, understanding what their needs were, how much of a challenge it was to get the children into school and what else was happening in the family, to reduce those barriers, to build up support to get the children into school. Some of those pupils have now left, and those parents still contact those key members in the school to advise of the good work that's happening, the achievements that are taking place, or can you give me advice, etc. That's a real key and the factor of improvement that's happened within that school and how they've learned with that, and that's what we are sharing across our other schools and across our colleagues in the RIC and nationally as well. And the same is within the case study there within Langley's. It's very much been that key quality of relationships, bringing in members of staff that were not being bogged down with other elements that were taking up their time within school, making sure that teachers were given the time to be teachers, but actually that family support really needed to take place, those relationships built in order to get children in school in the first place and celebrating their learning. So in one case within Langley's, they talked about a family that were consistent in terms of being late. That was no longer being looked at negatively, but it was a celebration of them attending. So even when that child turned up at 2:30, there was a celebration for that child being there. That changed the approach for the families as well, that child is now one of the top elements of attendance rather than the bottom 30%. So it just goes to show how well our schools know our families and what the journey they have taken. So that's
Thank you. Just in conclusion, convener, if members are interested as part of our work with Education Scotland and our attainment advisor, he reports on our progress towards the Scottish Attainment Challenge biannually, triannually and annually. We have different kinds of reports that go back and forward, and the most recent one is our triennial report, which is period 1 September to November 2022. for Falkirk and the work that we do around the Scottish Attainment Challenge. So if you'd be interested to read that report, I can ask Brian to circulate it round to you if you get the time to looks like this. But it is quite interesting. It gives you real detail of the different things that we've been doing and the scale that we've been doing it on this report if you're interested. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Gail and Rona for that very concise walk through the report. And at council yesterday we had a discussion on reports, and I have to say this report is very well written. It's very easy to read, and the appendices at the back showing the case studies linked very nicely into the report. So it's one of the best reports I've read for a long time. I would just like to say I have every confidence that the governance, management and how the funds are directed are being used properly. Having spoken recently, a few head teachers, you know, they talked me through how the PEF money is being used, and it's certainly making a difference to your pupils, and there's no doubt about it. The case study, one of them what we've just heard about the people getting these NAT 5s, or their NAT 5s, I think is wonderful. You know, so it shows you the benefits of the PEF money. And I'd just like also to ask, could we get an update report perhaps a year's time on the predictions that we've talked about here and the stretch aims, maybe come back in a year's time with something following COVID, just to see that we are actually making them. And so that's just my comments, and I'll just open up for questions. And Councillor Binney.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I want to thank you as well. It's a very good report. It's structured very well and it's very easy to read, you know, as well. And I want to say thank you to all the teachers. You know, it's been a difficult couple of years actually at school, and they've had to deal with the viruses as well and ill health with pupils and themselves, and you do a wonderful job. However, I've got a couple of wee questions on the report. I wanted to explore a wee bit about the financial so that I can understand a wee bit better myself, actually. I mean, what you've actually got here is, you know, you're talking about Falkirk schools will receive so much from the Scottish Government, make a significant difference to pupils. However, the growth of the cost of living will not cover to all pupils impacted by poverty. I think you said it was at the discretion of the schools, the headmistress, how she would use that PEF. But maybe what I'm a wee bit concerned about is the increase in parents applying for the children for free school meals. And what is that increase? Is it a significant increase? And obviously, is the cost of living, you know, I suppose maybe what I'm trying to get at is, I mean, what impact does that have with that PEF? And I know it's at discretion, and obviously, you know, having the meals is very, very important for so many reasons. But I really want to get to the question is, what's the impact that's actually got, you know, in the school providing that, using that PEF money for that, which is important, and what is the increase in people applying for free school meals? That's my first question. Sorry.
Thanks,
I was
Councillor.
wondering.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Mr. Naylor.
So there is an increase in those applying for free school meals because there are more people, given the cost of living crisis, that are meeting the qualifying criteria. I can't give you a figure just now, but I can ask a colleague to furnish that for the action note. In terms of the use of the funds, the free meal entitlement is the proxy measure for the allocation of the funds. So what would happen is that if a school, let's say, initially had 20% of its pupils entitled to a free school meal, if it's now 24%, then they'll get a larger share of Falkirk's total amount, if you know what I mean. So what happens year on year is some schools go up, some schools go down. I think the situation we're in now, and the challenge for the government, is that if across Scotland free meal entitlement goes up by 10%, then there's a requisite amount of money then that would need to be presumably added to the pupil equity fund. So I don't know if that answers your question, Councillor Benny, but
Yes, yes, it does. But also, what we've not factored is the cost of living, because I would imagine the cost of living inflation just now is like 10.1, and schools will need to pay that extra increase as well, I would imagine, to buy food to provide to the young people. So I suppose that's another factor that needs to be added in.
In terms of the food, the schools don't buy the food. The catering and cleaning service manage all of our school meals and free school meals. What I can tell you is that I was speaking to our catering manager just earlier this week, and foodstuffs have gone up on average between 16 and 20% over the course of the last year. And although we purchase through the Scotland Excel contract to make sure that the costs are as low as they can be, even through that, we're finding that certain foodstuffs are increasing very, very significantly. And the motion that was passed yesterday to be looking at local sourcing of foodstuffs, whilst that is a laudable aspiration, we believe that we might increase our costs by doing that. We've still to do the work, we've still to explore the potential there, but as you say, Councillor, costs are going up across the piece. As far as schools are concerned, and this relates perhaps to what Gail said earlier in the meeting about the spend being across both staffing and resources. The cost of resources is going up considerably, and if the staff resources are teachers, you'll be aware that currently there's national strikes in terms of pay awards. So if the cost of a teacher next year is greater than it was this year, then PEF monies will be able to buy less.
Yes, yeah, I understand that, yeah.
Okay,
Thank you for that, Mr. Neal. I've got another question. It's 7.4, the risk actually, and I want to understand how you'll manage that. It says funds must be spent by the end of the academic year, and that's the first time in the history of PEF, so not sure why that changed, because I know during lockdown you did have carries over, but what are the risks involved with this, and what measures or monitoring is the schools doing to ensure that all that PEF money, you know, your good housekeeping to ensure that money's being used?
Want me to take that one? So it was always within the guidance from the Scottish Government that funds should be spent where possible by the end of the academic year. However, in particular over COVID, that was relaxed, and Scottish Government have asked that that's been enforced much more to make sure that spend should be, in particular when there is a cost of living increase, which means that Scottish Government are looking at what funds they can make sure is spent across other areas other than just PEF. So that's one of the ways. How we are doing that is we have our resource officers that work directly with our primary schools, and we have our central PEF officer who works directly with myself and the team, and they meet with schools on a regular basis. We run report statements every 2 months, and I've set targets of where our spend should be. So at the moment we should be between 30 and 40% spend. Up until the end of December, we ran a report on the 8th of December and we're at 33% spend. So we're actually on track overall. The schools that individually that are not necessarily on track, that's where I would be having discussions with them. Our team would be working with them as well to make sure that whatever problems are stopping them from spending, if it's barriers that are caused because whether it's through HR, etc., or resources, we can try and reduce that for them, or we actually look at amendments to the plan to make sure they're on track while meeting the target. And that goes as well, Councillor Binney, with when we're talking about the actual allocation of funds. Although the allocation is based on free school entitlement, we are saying to schools, use your discretion, in particular for cost of living. Our working families are a big concern for us as well, so make sure that you're recognising those that require it, and it's not just about that SIND 1 and 2, etc. But yes, we are on track at the moment for spending. We're working with our schools closely to make sure that takes place.
Yeah, I'm really happy about that because it's important we use up all that money because funding's in short supply these days. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Binney. We'll now go to Councillor Forrest.
Hi, good morning all. I say thank you very much for this report. It's clear, it's concise, it's probably one of the best I've had since I became a councillor. I especially liked the case studies at the end. I thought that was very great. But come away from finances a wee bit. Page 15, 5.1. The aim of the funding is to reduce the poverty-related attainment gap across literacy, numeracy, health and well-being. The first two are fairly easy to quantify, but health and well-being, it's a wee bit more difficult. How do you do that? Could you tell me?
Who's going to take that one?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Councillor Forrest. In lots of ways is the answer. So we have a digital tracking system that all of our primary schools use, and that includes the ability to track and monitor performance over literacy, numeracy and health and wellbeing. So we're looking at each individual child and cohorts of children to see how they are managing, and these sit with the health and wellbeing curriculum and the meaning for curriculum for excellence. On top of that, you will realise that throughout the pandemic, health and wellbeing was also a priority area for all school improvement plans, and that was set by Education Scotland, who said that the curriculum during the pandemic particularly should have a major focus on literacy, numeracy and health and wellbeing. So they are now expecting that we're going back to being across the whole 8 curriculum subjects, but health and wellbeing has remained paramount for us. In addition to that, we've worked with the new Community Health and Wellbeing Mental Health Service, and our colleague Gillian Campbell is the current lead for that work, and that has set up a range of face-to-face and online services that allow children of all ages from 5 years up, and to those leaving care experience until 26 and those leaving school after that. And that gives them a range of, I suppose, social media type tools to access support and guidance around mental health, but also some face-to-face supports, and these are supported by the third sector organisations that Gail mentioned in terms of Aberlour, for example, and Barnados. We're working very closely with them. So health and wellbeing remains really important. You are right, is a bit more difficult to measure. However, we use the national practice model associated with getting it right for every child, and that provides schools with a range of quality indicators and measures to see individually and with cohorts where children are managing of health and wellbeing. And it's also been a real focus for our family support and family learning to try and help families to engage with their children and support them through difficult times. And during the pandemic, we had systems online on the website which gave families ideas of things that they could do together to support their own wellbeing as adults, but also that of their children and young people. So overall, we've got a fairly comprehensive package. We also have a centralised list of resources that we have for schools. Again, digital packs, things that we did and developed through the pandemic and since. So there are different things that we help with the curriculum too. So it's a kind of all-round package, if you like, of measures of quality assurance, of supports, of resources, and of mental health and wellbeing services that we now have. And we also have schools counselling.
And we have the survey. So for the first time, all Scottish schools took part in a census earlier in the year, so we're wading our way through all the outcomes of that. We're P5 to S6 children, we're completed the census. That it gives us a good understanding of the level of need within our authority as well. We can interrogate that data into school, SIND, etc. gender. So we're gathering all that data and making sure that our schools are much more informed about where improvements could still be required as well. So that gives us quite clear measures of improvement that we can take forward over the next few years.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest, will bring Mr Neil on for further comment.
Yeah, sure.
Just to say, Councillor Forrest, and I don't know if you managed to attend, but earlier this year, the colleague that has been referenced, Jill Campbell, who's leading on our mental health and wellbeing inputs, made a presentation as part of the induction process to new members at the Foundry, and within that presentation there was both an outline of the range of interventions that are now available, but also the beginnings of some data where we can track the number of children that are being referred to mental health services. So if it would be helpful, maybe ask Rona to ask Jill to forward that presentation to Mr. Pirrie, and that could perhaps be attached to the minute, just to refresh people's memories of the work that's ongoing in that area.
Good point. Back to you, Councillor Forrest.
Thank you very much. That was very clear, concise, and yes, that part may have slipped my memory. There was a heck of a lot for us to take in during the induction, but thank you for your information. I would also like to see some of the results of the survey once you have that completed, if that would be possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Councillor Forrest. I'd just like to ask a question. Page 22, Appendix 2. Does the strategic raising attendance lead have the capacity to focus on other schools? The improvement shown on Langley's primary school significant. So I was just wondering, can that strategic lead reach out to other schools and give them support?
So within Falkirk as well as our clusters, we have our neighbourhood groups, and the neighbourhood groups have been sharing that information widely, both in those networks and at our management meetings as well. So whilst that person is unlikely to have time to support other schools, what they certainly are is sharing how they have managed to create that impact and what type of post would need to be created in other schools. Some schools have taken it as a cluster approach, so it's not necessarily having a strategic lead or calling it the same type. But for example, if you look at the Falkirk cluster, there is a mix of allocations of funding. So Cumberland Park is a smaller amount because they've less children that are living within poverty, but they've started already to look at a full cluster approach of gathering some of those funds together so that posts can be shared across. So there will be posts of similar nature that will be shared. Larbert already do it for their family welfare officers. So they're shared across, all schools have committed a certain amount of fund that's collated as a cluster, and that's shared across as well and making an impact. So they won't, go back to your question, they won't replicate the strategic raising attainment lead post, but they are certainly learning from it and looking at how they can create similar posts or share that wealth across the cluster in their neighbourhoods.
Councillor Bissett, just to explain, the neighbourhood groups are groups of schools who have very similar demographics. They're different to the clusters. So cluster groups are the schools associated with a local secondary school. St Mungo's being slightly different because they are geographically all over the place, but the neighbourhood groups are set by demographically similar, and there are 7 of them. So they enjoy working like that because the issues in Group 1 schools, for example, are the schools with the least deprivation. So that includes schools like Kinnaird and Carron. Group 7 are schools with the most deprivation, so that includes schools like Bean Cross and Easter Crimmuirs and Langleys. So in working with those groups, they're addressing similar issues and similar things that crop up in terms of needs of their communities and needs of their children and young people. So it's been very successful in terms of being able to scale up good practice. And also each group has a lead head teacher, and those head teachers meet with me and I monitor and track the work that they're doing. And there's also an expected output from each group. So as they work together throughout the year, they've got to decide with the focus of work that they're doing, what is it that at the end of that work that will be useful to all schools in Falkirk, or to be able to scale up, as Gail said, to help those who are working within what we like to fund. And the focus is for the neighbourhood groups on raising attainment and achievement. So hope that's a bit of background.
Thank you very much. So that has reached the end of the agenda, unless there's any other questions. No. Councillor Anslow, have you any questions at all? Are you quite comfortable with the discussion we've had?
I don't have any, excuse me, I don't have any questions, but I do, like the others, I think this is a very good report. It is one of the best I've seen, and I write reports for a living, and I think this is really quite, I love the case studies. I found them particularly interesting because I attended Langley's Primary and Falkirk High School, and I understand some of the problems behind Difference was back in my day, we still had nuclear families that helped and dealt with a lot of this. Unfortunately, we don't have this sort of situation now with families being spread. So thank you very much for your comprehensive report, but also the work. It is quite vital to help people. It takes a lot of stress and worry off them. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Angelo. And just before we go, I'd just like to say, Sophie's moving on, so I'm probably going to embarrass her here. But Sophie's been with the council about a year and a half on the graduate scheme, and she's moving on to the Scottish Government. And I'd just personally like to thank her for her time on the Scrutiny Committee and her commitment to the Scrutiny Committee. And I wish her well for the future, as I'm sure we all do. And I would just like to welcome Jackie on board, and I'm sure she'll be a great advocate for Scrutiny as well. Thank you very much. Mr. Perry, did you want to?
Yeah, sorry, I've kind of dragging this back to business, unfortunately. Just in terms of the recommendations, so the committee's asked, just turn to the page, apologies, to agree the arrangements in place for pupil equity funding appropriate, note the impact made in closing the attainment gap, note the plans in place. But I think you asked earlier on if it's possible to get an update report in a year.
Yes.
Year's time. I noticed other members of the committee nodding. So is that a formal request that will be recorded as a decision by the committee to ask for a report in a year's time?
Yes. I think that's it.
Yes,
Noting, of course, the high quality and praise for the report.
Absolutely.
For next year. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and my apologies for not going back to your recommendations. I should know better. So I'd just like to take this opportunity just to thank everyone for their work in the Scrutiny Committee. It's a vital committee, and it does. Our aim for it is to try and just drill down on particular issues and maybe perhaps bring them to light a wee bit more. And so I'd just like to finish off by wishing you all a happy Christmas, and I hope 2023 is a great year for you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank
you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Have a nice
thank
Christmas.
you.